I never believed in anything I couldn't see, until the night my dog responded to a voice that sounded exactly like mine, but came from the woods. Duke was a large, smart Australian shepherd, and the only constant noise in that isolated cabin in northern Arizona. We understood each other with just a glance. So, when he started staring at the tree line, his tail between his legs and the fur on his neck bristling, I knew something was there. Have you ever felt the silence change weight? When the wind stops, the crickets go quiet, and it feels like the world is holding its breath. It was like that night. Duke was growling low, his eyes fixed on the darkness. And then, from the shadows, a voice called, "Duke!" The exact way I called him. Same intonation, same tone of affection, except I was standing right next to him. He looked at me, confused, then looked back at the woods. And when the voice called again, a little closer, he took a step forward. That's when I realized that whatever was out there knew his name. And worse, it knew mine too. The quiet life. In 1987, I lived alone in an old cabin, about 6 miles deep into the woods, north of Flagstaff. I worked cutting wood and fixing fences for the nearest neighbors who lived almost half an hour away. It was a silent life, the kind that forces you to get used to the sound of your own heart. Duke was my company. I found him as a puppy, lost near the road, his fur covered in mud and a sharp look in his eyes. He grew up with me, sleeping on the living room rug, following my steps in the woods like a living shadow. He was a dog with strong instincts. If something didn't smell right, he sensed it before me. The mornings were cold and damp. I'd wake up to the steam of my own breath and the crackle of wood burning in the stove. While I had black coffee, Duke stretched out by the door, waiting for time to go out. We spent the day in the woods, cutting logs and collecting fallen branches. In the afternoon, we'd sit on the porch, just listening to the wind hit the pines. The forest had its sounds, birds, squirrels, sometimes the distant cry of a coyote. It was all part of the backdrop of life there. But that autumn, the silence felt different. Sometimes Duke would stop suddenly, his muzzle pointed east toward the tree line. He'd stand there, motionless, sniffing something I couldn't smell. "It's just a deer," I'd say, patting my leg for him to come back. But he wouldn't. His gaze would fix on a point I couldn't see. And every once in a while he'd let out a low whimper, as if he recognized what was there and disliked it. It happened several times before that night. I'd laugh, say he was getting old. But looking back today, I realized Duke already knew that something was prowling around us, testing the limit of the dark. And every time the sun set, he'd lay a little closer to the door, as if waiting for something to try to come in. The footprints, the first strange thing happened on a night of weak wind near the end of October. The moon was high, cutting the forest into patches of silver and shadow. I was sitting on the porch, cleaning the axe blade, when Duke suddenly raised his head. His entire body stiffened. He was looking in the same direction as always. The tree line, that dark strip that began about 50 yards past the yard, where the lamplight no longer reached. The hair on his back rose up as if it had a life of its own. And then, without warning, he started to growl, low at first, then deeper, firmer. I looked in the same direction, trying to see what he saw. Nothing. No sound, no movement. The wind stopped, the kind of silence that doesn't belong to the natural world, the one that arrives suddenly and makes your skin crawl. "Quiet, boy," I murmured, trying to calm him. But he didn't hear me. His gaze remained fixed, his tail low, his breathing heavy. A few seconds later, I heard something. Not an animal, it was different. A dry sound, as if someone was walking slowly through the leaves, testing the ground before stepping. Long, spaced-out steps circling the boundary of the darkness. I grabbed the flashlight and aimed the beam into the woods. The trees reflected the light, but nothing moved, just shadows. Then for an instant I saw 2 points shine in there, too low to be human eyes, too high for any animal I knew. Duke growled harder and took a step forward. I yelled for him to stop, and he stopped. The points of light vanished. The noise ceased. Next morning, I found footprints on the edge of the yard. They looked like an animal's, but the shape was almost human. Long, deep toes and strange marks in the middle, as if the foot had been bent. The surrounding earth was disturbed, smelling of wet soil, even without rain. I kept it to myself. I didn't want to sound crazy telling footprint stories, but Duke didn't forget. He spent the rest of the day restless, following the shadow of the trees with his eyes. And that night, he didn't sleep. He sat in front of the door, staring into the dark, as if he was waiting for someone to return. The imitation. On the third night, the wind changed. It came from the east, cold and dense, bringing a metallic smell like wet iron. Duke had been restless since sunset, pacing back and forth on the porch, ears up, muzzle pointed at the forest. I had already learned to trust his instincts. When he was like that, something was nearby. I grabbed the flashlight and the rifle, left the door ajar, and sat back down in the wooden chair. For a while, everything remained calm, only the sound of branches cracking in the wind, until Duke stopped walking. He stood motionless, his whole body tense, his gaze fixed on the tree line. And in the next second I heard it. "Duke!" The voice came from there, from the shadows. Low, calm, like someone calling a dog home. At first, I thought it was an echo or someone lost, but the voice was identical to mine. Same timbre, same intonation. Duke looked at me, then at the forest, confused. He growled low, undecided. "Duke!" the voice called again, this time a little closer. The sound didn't travel through the forest as it should have. It came between the trees, sliding as if the air carried it. It was familiar and wrong at the same time. The kind of voice you recognize, but your body rejects. "Who's there?" I yelled. No answer, just Duke's heavy breathing. Then the voice spoke again. "Frank." My name, the way my ex-wife used to say it, with that tired, drawn-out tone. My blood ran cold. Duke started to walk slowly toward the tree line, ignoring my call. I pointed the flashlight, the beam trembling. The light passed through the first row of pines and stopped in a gap between the trunks. For a second, I thought I saw someone, a thin silhouette, motionless, with its head slightly tilted. The eyes reflected the flashlight beam but didn't blink. "Duke, come back!" I shouted. He stopped a few feet from the edge, growling, his whole body shaking. And from inside, the voice repeated my shout, exactly the same, but with a slight delay, a second-long echo. "Duke, come back!" That sound paralyzed me. It wasn't an echo, it was a reply. And that's where I understood that whatever was calling for us didn't want to come in. It wanted us to go to it. The confrontation. The next morning, I swore to myself it was just an echo, that the wind through the trees could make the voice sound human, that maybe some hunter was playing a trick. I tried to convince myself of this all day, but Duke wouldn't let me. He followed the sound of the wind as if he heard something I couldn't. I took the rifle with me to the shed and stayed there all day, sawing boards, hammering nails, anything to occupy my mind. With every strike of the hammer, I heard my name, like a whisper hidden within the sound of the metal. At night, I decided to go to the tree line. I had to understand. I grabbed the flashlight, the hunting knife, and called Duke. He hesitated, then followed, tail low, ears flat. The ground was damp, full of marks, human footprints, but too light, and others, deeper, of an animal. The two seemed to walk together, and sometimes blended. "Whoever you are, the game is over," I muttered, more to myself than to anyone else. The forest seemed alive, breathing. The air was cold, but dense, as if something warm was inside, hidden. I walked about 50 yards to where the flashlight beam began to die. Duke stopped, looked at me, and then forward. And then I heard it again. "Frank." It wasn't just my voice. It was my laugh too mixed in. The thing was laughing between the trees. I shouted, ordered it to show itself. The laughter stopped. Duke started to howl, a sound I had never heard before, a long, hoarse howl of pure fear. And in the middle of that sound, a reply came, husky and imprecise. "Duke, quiet." The two words sounded distorted, as if the throat speaking them was learning how to talk. Duke whimpered low and backed away. I wanted to run too, but my legs seemed stuck to the ground. I returned to the cabin before dawn, swearing I wouldn't go out at night anymore. I boarded the windows and left the rifle by the bed. Duke lay by the door, wide awake. To this day, I don't know if it was courage or stubbornness, but that morning, when the voice called again, this time from the other side of the door, I realized I had no choice. I needed to find out what it was. And if you've also heard something calling you when no one was there, leave a like and subscribe. It might sound silly, but it's good to know we're not the only ones hearing what shouldn't be heard. I grabbed the rifle. I opened the door. Duke went first. When I opened the door, the air outside felt thick, almost liquid. The fog was creeping from the ground like cold smoke. Duke walked out slowly, his body tense, ears low. I followed him with the rifle aimed, trying to see through the shadows. The yard was silent, but the silence had a sound. Low, constant hum, as if the whole world was taking a deep breath. I looked around and realized everything was still. Not even the wind was moving. "Duke," I called softly. He walked to the edge of the yard and stopped. The flashlight illuminated the nearest trees, and that's when I saw it. Something moved between the trunks. It didn't run, it slid. A thin figure, too tall to be human, too hunched to be an animal. And then, from within the dark, the voice came again. "Duke!" But now it wasn't. Identical to mine. It was a jumble of sounds trying to be human. The syllables were broken, scratching, as if the air was passing through a throat that didn't know what it was doing. Duke responded with a deep growl, his paws digging into the ground. The thing moved closer, and when the light hit it, I saw a shape, a body covered in something that looked like skin ripped off and put back wrong. The face wasn't really a face. It seemed to be trying to imitate one. Deep-set, colorless eyes, a mouth too wide, stretched into a senseless grin. "Frank," it said in my voice. "Here." The sound broke me inside. Duke barked and lunged, and I yelled for him to come back, but it was too late. The creature crouched, its entire body twisting in an impossible movement, and disappeared into the trees with him. I ran after them. The ground was a chaos of leaves and mixed footprints. The sound of my name echoed from all sides. Frank, 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 until it became just a noise like 1,000 mouths. Repeating at the same time, I aimed the flashlight, and the light caught Duke, standing in front of something I couldn't see clearly. He was facing me, but his eyes seemed glazed over. And then he barked, but it wasn't his sound. It was the sound of human laughter. I fired. The bang ripped through the air, and the sound stopped. Duke fell, and the figure vanished into the dark. I stood there, my heart beating so hard it almost hurt. The silence returned, heavy, and I realized I was alone. The forest swallowed what was its. It took me a few seconds to understand what I had done. Duke was motionless, his body half-turned, his eyes still open. I went to him slowly, afraid of what I would see. I touched his chest. His heart was still beating, weak. Short breaths, but alive. Relief and guilt mixed in a way I can't explain. I picked him up in my arms and carried him back to the cabin. I locked the doors, the windows, everything. The silence outside seemed more dangerous than any noise. Duke whimpered low, as if daydreaming. I spent the rest of the night sitting beside him, the rifle in my lap and my eyes fixed on the door. When dawn broke, he was gone. The door, which I swore I had locked, was ajar. Outside, the footprints led to the tree line, two sequences, his and others, that seemed to walk backward, following him inside. I stood there for hours, looking at the forest. The wind made the branches move as if they were breathing. No sound, no answer, just the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for me to call him back. I spent days searching. I followed trails, called for Duke until my voice failed. I found deer bones, torn clothes, strange tracks that seemed to change shape every few feet. But of my dog, nothing. One afternoon, I found old Grey Horse, a Navajo man who lived further south, near the reservation. I told him what happened. He listened without interrupting, his gaze fixed on the horizon. When I finished, he only said, "They listen when you speak with love. That's why they imitate." I explained it was just my dog, that the thing spoke like me. He nodded slowly. "The form doesn't matter. They want to see how far you'll go after what you love." He also said that some things in the desert know how to copy but never understand what they copy. That if you answer or follow the call, you lose something that doesn't come back. Soul, luck, name. I returned to the cabin, but never pointed the flashlight toward the woods again. The silence, it took on a different weight, as if the very air remembered what happened. And every now and then, when the wind blows from the east, I still hear my name coming from the trees, soft, slow, and with the same tone Duke used to beg for food. It's been 38 years since that night. I still live near Flagstaff, but much further from the woods. I like open spaces now where I can see the horizon without anything hiding. I never got another dog, not because I didn't want one, but because I couldn't bear to hear my name said that way again. Sometimes, when the wind comes from the north, I swear I hear the sound of Duke's paws on the porch, the slight creak of the boards, the scratch at the door. I stay quiet, holding my breath, waiting for the silence to decide if it will leave me alone. We learn that true fear isn't the scream, it's the memory. The desert has its own way of keeping what it takes and giving it back when it wants to. What calls me now is no longer what was there. That night, it's just the echo of a longing that doesn't know how to die. I still talk to him sometimes, just to say goodnight, and I always do it in a low voice, never too loud, because if they answer, I don't know if it would be Duke or the thing that learned to use his name. If this story gave you the chills, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell. What calls your name doesn't always want to be found, and when it does, it's better not to answer.